We are live. Welcome to Shifty Perspective, episode 23. Today, we are joined by Chris Timmerman, who is a scientist at Imperial College in London, one of the world's most renowned research institutes. He led the first neuroimaging research on the effects of DMT in the human brain. And Chris is also the president of the Foundation for the Study of Human Consciousness. So I think today we're going to be delving pretty deep. So, hey, Chris, good to meet you. How are you doing?
Hi Ash, yeah, nice to meet you as well. Doing good. Yeah. As you know, we just, had a bit of an urgency here at the boat, so a bit intense. But yeah, one of the water things just pop out in the middle. But yeah,
Oh,
we're
no.
getting that fixed. But yeah, apart from that, I'm good. I'm having a nice week.
Cool.
Yeah.
How long have you lived on a boat for?
4 months. It's fairly
Cool.
new.
Oh,
Yeah.
nice. Okay. How are you finding that?
Well, nice. Yeah, it's very good. And the winter's a bit more. It's a bit more hostile with the cold, but I'm getting on well. I'm enjoying it quite a lot, actually.
So I
Yeah.
see I saw you're from Chile originally.
Yeah.
But your name Timmerman is a Dutch name, according to my friend anyway. I'm in the Netherlands, and I was talking to my friend last night, and they said that Timmerman is a Dutch name. Are you of Dutch heritage, but you were born in Chile, or what's your background?
Yeah, well, it's a bit of a complicated story, but yeah, the easy way to understand it is that 7 generations back, so I think beginning of 1900s, I think it's German
Okay.
that came to Chile. It's just like Chile and Latin America. There's huge migration
Mm-hmm.
stories, and everybody's mixed to a certain extent. So yeah, that's a bit the story, but it's a long way back. I don't even have
Yeah.
a direct sort of connection or knowledge even of the people that came there at that time, or very little really. But it's the way that it goes there. You have Italian, Dutch, all kind of migrants who get there, and
Okay.
and of
And
course you have the huge Spanish sort of colonial
yeah.
influence. But it's important to say that Latin America is just like it's a big mix ethnically,
Mm-hmm.
because unlike in the North American sort of countries, uh, yeah, the Spanish Empire was very much about mixing and stuff. So everybody's like, everybody has a bit of blood, and I think there are studies showing that there's a percentage of indigenous blood that almost everybody has in South America. So
Okay.
it's
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah. Well, culturally,
So
quite well.
Spanish is your first language then as well?
Yeah, it
Oh,
is.
okay, cool. So how long have you been over in Europe, in the UK for?
So Europe, I've been for 8 years now. Yeah, now 8 years. I first came to Italy.
Okay,
I lived in northern Italy for a while in Bologna,
nice.
like 2-3 years, and after that I went to the UK, and I've been in the UK for 5 years, 5.5 years. Kind of, yeah.
So your research, your and your work, did you start this in Chile, or is this something you have just got into more in the UK or in Italy?
So I started to do a bit of like work. Since I was in Italy, I started to do some reviews, some amassing information, and publishing some stuff in Chile with regards of this. But the actual like empirical work
Mm-hmm.
started 5 years ago when I came to the UK. When I went to base myself at Imperial College. Yeah.
So what is your main focus of work, and how did you kind of get onto the path that you're on now? So because your background is psychology originally.
Yeah,
Okay,
psychology and neuroscience.
nice.
So I've always been very interested in the mind. I've always been very interested in drugs as a point of research in general.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, is a good way to try to understand the way that the mind works is by perturbing it. And with drugs, you have a very unique way of perturbing consciousness, a very
Yes.
unique way to alter consciousness with different sort of parameters. So um, yeah, so always been interested. Even I think from school, I was interested in drug research to some extent. I read a bit about it. And always from the point of view of psychology. So the effects in the mind, the effects in consciousness, and how can drugs help us understand this? So, as a psychologist, usually when you graduate in Chile, you don't have a lot of possibilities of research around these kind of things because of money and because of the institutions don't, there's not a lot of stuff happening there.
Yeah.
But there is some work, right? But yeah, at the time I wasn't kind of like in that. So anyway, at some point, I won a scholarship to study neuroscience in Italy. And I was there for a couple of years. And during those years, I was always interested in psychedelics, in a way, San Pedro and peyote, which contain mescaline, are a big part of the Americas, but in South America, San Pedro is a big cactus, in terms of like it's a bit everywhere and it happens, and like you travel around, and it is part of the journey in a way for many people. So I'm very interested in psychedelics in that regard, and I think it left an imprint or sort of like a mark of like curiosity for me for many years. So it happened to be that I was studying neuroscience in Italy 7 years ago. And when I was there, I found out about a conference happening in the UK about psychedelic research. It's called Breaking Convention.
Yeah.
So I went there, and I discovered the amount of amazing stuff that was happening in the UK and in the US. Mostly a bit some of the research also in Zurich and Switzerland, but mostly around the stuff in Imperial College, which I was found it was amazing. So at that point I contacted I basically at the conference I met my actual colleagues from now.
Cool.
Yeah. So in that I kind of like I basically met Mendel Kalen. I don't know if you've heard of him. He now has a company called Waypaths, and he was a psychedelic researcher. He did all his work with music and psychedelics, and now he has a company on generating music experiences and then healing experiences based on music, very much with a psychedelic model in mind.
Okay, is this in the UK?
Yeah, he's in the UK. Yeah.
Cool.
I continue his stuff later on, but anyway, through like. I met him there, and through him I contacted David Nutt, who's an important researcher in the UK on drugs, an eminent figure really. And I proposed something to him. He accepted the proposal, and I started to do a PhD in London. So I've did that for 5 years. I've just finished my PhD now, and I'm still working at the lab.
Congratulations.
Thank you, man. Yeah. So that
must feel good.
Yeah. No, it's been a super interesting, very inspiring ride actually, with a lot of things, and it's so much things to do and discover in these years of like, I basically focused on DMT. The basic approach is like, let's figure DMT out. Like, let's try to understand this from many different angles, and that's what I've been doing. Yeah.
And how do you feel like, are you getting closer to really understanding DMT? Because I mean, I often talk about DMT on my podcast, but I don't really understand it truly. I have my own interpretation of what, of my experiences and from what I know roughly, but like, it seems to be still quite a lot of mystery surrounding this.
Yeah. It's, there are many sides to it, definitely, right? And the way that I've approached it, decided to approach it, is from like from a perspective in which both the importance of experience is there all the way through, while at the same time we try to learn from what happens in the organism, the brain.
Yeah.
and how do we generate bridges between these two levels of explanation, between the intimate subjective sort of component and the more biological brain matter sort of stuff. And I think in that, in those two worlds, there's a lot of things happening. So at the personal, intimate level, like you say, a lot of people make up their own kind of like theories, and it's almost like when you speak with people, they all have their own specific philosophy of the nature of reality to some degree. And I'm also studying that, the way that these philosophies that people have may shift these metaphysical views, these worldviews. So there's an element of that, and then there's an element of actually kind of like, all right, so this is consciousness research at the moment. The brain is a big part of that. The brain is a system that is very linked to experience.
Yes.
What happens to that system? And we've found some things there. I mean, we've made some important connections between, for example, the brain, that the way that the brain is, during dreaming, and what happens when people are having these very immersive experiences with DMT, where it has this sort of kind of like virtual reality component to it, which is quite similar to dreaming in a way. So some of those things are there. Then there are other sort of components in which, for example, modern, prevailing theories in neuroscience speak that the brain is kind of like a predictive machine, and what happens to these predictive processes, and how do you build realities from their disruption in a way? The DMT state. So a lot of it has been focused on that. So this immersive sort of component, and what does it mean, like under DMT, how is this enabled through the machinery of the brain? And then the other element is really just exploring the experience. So just really
the subjective experience.
Yeah, just zooming into that, and looking at the structures of experience across people, and trying to have a sense of the story, the DMT story.
Okay. Do you find with dreaming, there is now a direct link with that on our own DMT in our body? Is that or is that actually not true? Or how much research is there on this?
We don't have evidence for that yet. It's a possibility, but but yeah, we don't have that evidence. That this is still at the realm of speculation at the moment. Whether or not endogenous DMT, the one that is produced in the body naturally, has an important role for these experiences of dreaming, near-death experiences, and so on. But the phenomenological side, the experience side, is quite similar.
Definitely.
And we see that some of the brain mechanisms are also quite kind of similar. The brainwave patterns that are formated there. Yeah.
Do you know if the reaction of the brain on DMT is completely different to that of other psychedelics, or can you see, have you done maybe side-by-side imaging? I know it was only recently that LSD was actually we had the first brain imaging scans, right? So has there been major comparisons?
Yeah, well, I've done some analysis on that, on the data of the LSD study and this study, and we're tapping into some stuff. I still need to publish some more results from the DMT studies, but broadly speaking, there's a lot of interesting similarities that are quite evident, and there are some things that are different.
Okay.
One of those things is that the immersive component of DMT is kind of like mirrored by these increases in delta and theta frequencies. There's a specific brainwave patterns, and these are the same sort of brainwave patterns that you also see during the experience of dreaming. These lower frequencies, which become kind of like take more of a protagonist role during the experience.
Do we understand what impact those brainwaves have? What those frequencies actually mean as such, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, these are essentially low frequency pattern. Like, so when you're normal waking state, your dominant brainwave pattern is commanded by alpha frequencies. This is the prevailing frequencies in the adult human brain. If you look at kids or younger people, the prevailing brainwave pattern is theta waves. And that's lower frequencies, slower waves, which are dominating.
What age does this change?
It's a progressive thing. You know, as you grow, it shifts from theta to alpha.
Is this connected to like neuroplasticity?
Well, it does speak about neuroplasticity, but not in the direct way in which you can think of it. Just in the sense that the brain is plastic because it changes over time.
Cool.
But so essentially, what's happening is that the brainwave patterns shift back in the DMT state to this theta and this delta wave. So these lower frequency waves. And yeah, I mean, it was an initial approximation, but that's one of the things that we found, that it has more like this dreamlike quality in terms of brain waves.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's like especially prominent during the immersive component of the experience, when people are having this feeling of a breakthrough. No longer, like, reality is no longer anchored in this consensus external reality, but it's now being anchored by a different sort of space. And it's plausible that on very high doses of LSD, something similar happens.
Okay.
Just haven't studied that, and usually people don't have such big doses of LSD comparatively to DMT to make that connection. The other comparison that I have heard on that regard, and that it's still a possibility, is that high doses of psilocybin, mushrooms, can have sort of like a DMT flavor because of that. And, you know, if you look at those two molecules, are very similar, both psilocybin and DMT.
Okay. But I mean, I'm just talking from, I guess, my own experiences here. I can't see anything that is similar to a breakthrough experience on DMT. Like even when you know, larger doses of psilocybin or larger doses of LSD or LSD derivatives, I don't have that. There's still the sense of self, which I don't know how to explain it, but you know, like on a breakthrough experience of DMT, you are no longer, I guess I'm no longer me. I just am. I mean, I'm in existence, and there's observation, but this is gone. Everything, and my ego, I guess that's what they say, ego death, it's just disappeared, and I can't think of anything like it, really.
Yeah. But it's interesting. I mean, you do hear, you know, reports like that also with high dose psilocybin at times from other people.
Okay.
I think that there's it's still an open question. That's what I'm saying. It's like there is a speculative component in that, but it could be true. And then there's another thing which I think is quite relevant, is that one of the things that we've mapped out in terms of experience of DMT is that these dynamics, the way that the experience fluctuates, is very intense. It goes from 0 to 100 back to 0 in, you know, super fast in a way.
It's crazy, minutes, seconds.
Right. And that in itself has a flavor of experience. This being launched out of a rocket, when people, the way that the body digests mushrooms is slower because it's not small.
I see. Yeah.
Right. And that also has a quality to experience. That come up is lower, and that has a specific experiential component. That's another sort of, that's what we call pharmacokinetics in a way. It's another element of like that can influence experience in a meaningful way, which we don't know, you know, how that would turn out essentially.
Do you ever look into ayahuasca and make comparisons? Because that is, I mean, a lot slower, right? Than that would be more similar to psilocybin, to an experience of mushrooms.
Yeah. Well, the case of ayahuasca is interesting because, as you say, it's closer to mushrooms in terms of like what I was saying, like pharmacokinetics or the temporal sort of aspect of it. And some people would argue that there are similarities. Now, it's very hard to make comparisons. One, because the rituals that accompany an ayahuasca experience are very different from the ones from a psilocybin experience. That changes the experience. Like We have so much evidence showing now how set and setting or context or rituals permeate the experience,
Yes.
to a very high degree, and it's very hard to separate substance from context in these
How
experiences.
do you do that in a lab? Because that's got to be really difficult,
Yeah, so yeah, it's an interesting question. Like this researcher, very early on in psychedelic research, he was an anthropologist. He said we should have culture controlled experiments, where you would be able to control for that cultural variable when you're having these rituals, these contexts, and
Interesting.
being able to generate that. So I think that's a big part of the confound, which makes it very difficult for us to say conclusively this is this or this is that.
Yeah.
Then the other thing is that ayahuasca has many compounds. It's not just DMT. Is a DMT, and it has the other plants. So it's like actually ayahuasca is the vine, right?
Yeah.
That's the vine of the dead. And then you have the how's it in English? Anyway, a plant which contains DMT. These two things are combined, right?
It's with the MAO inhibitor, right?
But the MAO inhibitors is the actual vine, the ayahuasca vine, and the DMT is containing the leaves of the other plant. So and those two, and there's some research implying strongly that they actually do act on experience as well on their own right, and they also have an interactive effect. So if you would have DMT, you would have the inhibitions of the MAOI, the MAO, and then those two things combined in their own mix generate another sort of flavor of experience.
Okay, interesting.
Still a pending question. And then you have the purgative element, the aspect that ayahuasca induces vomiting,
diarrhea, that kind of thing.
And that thing, it has its own flavor of experience, which mixes up with all the mental stuff, and
yeah.
So there's so many variables in place. That it's difficult to tease them apart at this stage. But these are empirical questions. With sophisticated experiments, you could try to figure these things out.
Is there like an end goal with your research? I mean, obviously, I'm sure you'll just keep finding new things to look into as such. But like, do you and your colleagues have like you're trying to solve a particular thesis, particular question?
I think that there are several questions. One of the one of the things that has come up recently is, like, for example, what can psychedelics? In what way do the study of psychedelics provide insights into our understanding of consciousness? And I think that's kind of like an important question. In what way is this a relevant sort of aspect for research? For that, I would say that there's two main things. Like, one is these experiences have been around for a long time. Like, if you look at archaeological evidence,
right?
What?
Thousands of years?
Some evidence like points towards thousands. Other evidence points towards like hundreds of years. It's really not that straightforward. But the important thing is that they have been part of cultural developments, and they've been used for a long, long time in these cultures, and they have sort of like a social cohesion function in many of these places. So they've been part of the human story for quite a while. So if we want to understand human beings and human consciousness, any sort of model of consciousness that do not take these experiences into account is incomplete. So these if you have sort of like a realm of human consciousness, human experiences, right? If you want to understand that complexity, you need to take these things into account. So that's one thing. And then there's the other argument that I think is quite an interesting and compelling one, is that when you perturb aspects of consciousness, say the sense of self, right? Ego death, right? You become aware of its boundaries. You become aware of its structure, right?
Yeah.
You understand how it works. So
it wasn't there before.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah.
So like it's interesting, like even if you think of, for example, the one of the central tenets of Buddhism is that you grow into the awareness that the sense of self is a construction, that the sense of self is impermanent, that the ego is like a construction that we build through our cognitive processes and our mind, and we try to grasp it, and we that makes us convinced that it's real, and that's why we suffer, and so on.
Yeah.
A similar sort of thing happens with psychedelics, like through psychedelic practice, if you want to call it like that. I think we should at some point call it psychedelic practice, like you can with the right guidance, you can come also to a similar sort of realization that the sense of self is constructed. Why? Because it goes away and experience is still happening. The sense of self is impermanent. So when you do this, you can start to figure out what are the aspects of the self that are disrupted under psychedelics. How do we generate the sense of self? Does a sense of space, a sense of time is relevant, a sense of identity, a sense of body? All of these things become altered in different sort of ways during this experience. So I think that that's a quite an important sort of like aspect of it. By disrupting this thing, by killing the ego, if you will, you kind of like become aware of its components through these experiences. And I think that that's an important part of what we're trying to figure out.
Do you see, though, our sense of self is something that is so non-permanent, and is constantly changing? Like, do we even have a real way of, like, I mean, I know you listed those kind of parameters there, but like, do we have a real way of actually defining what is our consciousness, and what like differentiates us being conscious to, say, my dog, because according to some people, only humans are conscious, and it's our ability to have language, etc. Like, what do you feel that is in your experiences?
Well, I think it's like it really depends. There's different definitions of consciousness. The broad one is the sense of awareness, or the switching on, the presence or absence of conscious experience. Refers
If
to
you're
that.
self-aware, if you're not self-aware through an experience, say, such as DMT, where you break through, but you're not unconscious in the sense of your brain is not blacked out, you're still experiencing something, but you lose that sense of consciousness, then is there a name for like what that state is?
Well, some people call that pure awareness.
Pure awareness, okay.
Which is a sense in which, the self is not part of that experience. You're just like a point of consciousness, which some people link with this 5-methoxy DMT experience, or the Bufo-Alvari sort of experience. It's interesting. I mean, I think it's still like an open question whether or not it's a matter of degrees, or if it's an absolute. Maybe you've destroyed a large part of the ego, and there's a little part there which is still kind of like registering
hanging
the
on.
experience. Hanging on. And then if you push beyond that, you have these dissociative blackouts that people also report, right? We don't know that still, which is why I think it's important to study experience in a disciplined way and responsibly, because it's easy to get to claims about experience. But we can also be better at studying experience. That's a bit the agenda that I try to push for. So that's one, and so one definition is this presence or absence of like experience, and then the other one is like you say, self-awareness, or the fact that we are aware that we have an experience per se. That would be kind of like a more high-level definition of what consciousness is. And we don't know to what extent other animals have that. Some people argue that some mammals definitely have that, and other people. The truth is that most of us don't know, and the way that we can infer to that is by looking at their nervous systems and seeing how close they are to us, and
Is that the kind of the benchmark, is the comparison to us as the go-to?
Well, it's complicated, because if you're trying to look for a point of reference, where else are you going to look for?
True. Yeah.
It's like, so it's all, I think it's similar to the discussion of artificial intelligence. A lot of people are like, well, will the machines actually become conscious? Well, what do you mean conscious? Well, like human conscious. So it's like, the point of reference is inevitably us.
Yeah.
To that sort of extent. I think, it is the only parameter that we have, because ultimately our experience is the only thing that we have, of certainty of anything. It is our starting point.
Yep.
So it kind of makes sense to look at, to look at our nervous system as a point of reference if we want to, look into these other animals.
Do you ever, in your research into consciousness, is it strictly focusing on DMT and psychedelic compounds, or do you ever researching like meditative states and look into these other methods of kind of understanding our consciousness?
We look at, we're starting to look into that. I'm also particularly interested in that, and also states a bit like hypnosis and things of the sort. There is definitely that interest. I haven't done any empirical work, but some comparative sort of thing, looking into the studies and the similarities and collaborations with others. Yeah, we do some of that stuff.
How many of you are actually working? Like, is it quite a niche field, or are there a lot of scientists kind of focusing on this?
Psychedelic research?
Yes, psychedelic research and understanding consciousness in general.
It's becoming a growing field of major interest, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel, just out of my own kind of understanding, that the opinions are starting to shift, that people are kind of actually understanding or willing to try to understand psychedelics more and take it more seriously, because up until recently, I think it's been quite a fringe thing, and maybe people just associate anything with drugs as just people getting fucked up, I guess, is the the kind of is the general association, and they don't take it seriously. So like, I've noticed a shift. Do you feel amongst other scientists and other kind of I'm guessing there's a whole heap of departments that you work around, so are they starting to change their opinions on it?
Yeah, I would say so. There's some a good example for me is that there's some major institutions who are starting their own psychedelic research departments, and then you have very renowned scientists who are specifically starting to do some research with psychedelics. So yeah, I would say most definitely it's changing. It's been changing for a while, and I think one of the pivotal things that happened was that Michael Pollan published his book in 2018.
Yeah,
that is a big sort of sanctioning of the mainstream to the this sort of field of inquiry.
Do you struggle to get volunteers for your studies?
Not really, no.
I can imagine there's probably a lot of people signing up. How do people actually how do you find people for this kind of thing, and how do you separate like, I don't mean to be rude, but maybe people that might have a bias, so are going into it because they want to take drugs, versus people who are going in a purely I'm gonna just do this for science?
Well, I think a mix between both things is quite good, because the idea of like going to take drugs, mentioned like that, can sound a bit superficial, but from a point of view of a very experienced psychonaut, it can be a very profound sort of thing, right? So it's like, for me, the best sort of participants have been the one that are able to trust the sort of the process, the sort of artificial process of having these profound experiences in a very controlled environment.
Yeah.
And at the
Which must be
same,
scary also.
yeah, exactly. And at the same time, very curious about what might happen.
Mm-hmm.
That are also delving in with a sense of excitement and yeah, pure curiosity, and openness to that curiosity. People that don't have such fixed ideas about what this thing can be because of their previous experiences, but are open to this novelty in it.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those in my experiences are the best volunteers, and also colleagues and people who are scientists and know how the procedure works. And people have to be patient, because sometimes we need to be fiddling with the equipment, getting it ready, and it's a lot of things, but at the same time we do try to keep things in a very respectful and in a good sort of environment.
Are you able to explain kind of the procedure of for example, on your the last study of the brain imaging on DMT, how that actually happens? So going from arriving at Imperial, I guess, for the person who's doing it.
So in the last study, we were doing this fMRI study with DMT.
Okay.
We're measuring, we're putting people in scanners and having these DMT experiences. And we were measuring brain waves. So we're both having EEG cap and inside of the scanner. So people got in, let's say in the morning, 9 a.m. We welcomed them in kind of like the preparation room, which is a room which is all about like EEG equipment and weird sort of techie stuff. But we dress up all the thing we cover up all the technological equipment. We put mood lights. We have like a nice playlist of ambient and kind of like chill music. Cool. And we try to keep it kind of like quiet and respectful and comfortable in a way. And at the same time, easy. You don't want to make it too quiet, but we sort of ritualize the space in a sort of soft manner, which I think is important. So anyway, they come in, we do a couple of tests, like, people have to give urine samples to check that they haven't had any other drugs in the past that can affect the results now. Not in the past, in the immediate past. Yeah. Some participants.
Have you ever had people that
some participants are
excluded? Sorry, go on.
Yeah. Some participants are excluded because of that. Yeah, it's unfortunate, but it can happen. So yeah, we have a bit of that. Then we set up the EEG equipment. So we put on this cap with these electrodes. We prepare these electrodes, and in the middle of it, we're talking with them. Or if they want to be quiet, we don't. Then we ask about their expectations, how they're feeling about it. They reconfirm that they want to be part of the experiment. And so it's all a moment of like this. I find these are all important moments in which the person is kind of like recommitting to this, which I think is actually very important, because if we're going to jump into this void, you need to be able to let go. For that, you need like a certain degree of commitment. So yeah, we do that. Then we put them inside of the scanner. We prepare them. We do a body scan relaxation procedure. We do it through the speakers, and people are just kind of like relaxing. Then we start the scan. 8 minutes pass. And then, there's a recording of my voice that they hear through the headphones saying the dose will begin now, and then they get the dose.
This is intravenous?
Intravenous, yeah.
Wow.
And then they have their experience inside of the scanner.
Oh my God. It just sounds so crazy. I can't imagine. I think I'd be able to do it. I mean, I think just the scanner itself is quite overwhelming.
Yeah.
And then, I don't know if I could switch my brain off and commit to. I think I'd be too scared, basically. It can be intense. How long does it last for? Because I'm not really aware of the intravenous. Is it actually could you just kind of keep it going?
Yeah. I mean, that's what we're trying to do now, right? So keep it going. See, we're about to start that study. No, but the one that we did is just a single push that looks to simulates the smoked version of DMT. But
That's
it's a bit longer. It's a bit longer than the smoked.
Like 20, 30 minutes or?
No. It's still like the peak is around 2 to 3 minutes.
Okay.
But it ends like the tail is a bit longer.
Okay.
And people are kind of like completely back by 10 to 15 minutes. But the peak is still the 2-3 minute mark, still is short. And we had we were giving medium to high doses, actually. Wasn't low.
Is this to get a breakthrough?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
So we had a lot of people. We had like 25 participants, and not a single, when you're in the scanner, you have like a horn system that if you push, it kind of like signals like stop the scans automatically. And we tell them you can have, this is a SOS sort of thing for you if you want it. Not a single person pressed that. Right?
Wow.
So it was good. I mean, it was pretty safe in that regard. And yeah, people had challenging moments, many of them, but it was all fine.
You said there's a pre-recorded message. Are you able to communicate though at all?
Yeah.
During it? Okay.
Yeah, so we set up a system where people have these kind of like headphones, and I had a microphone, and sometimes we did this body scan with the microphone before,
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. That's how it
sounds absolutely fascinating. Is this something that going forward with the extended, would you be looking at trying to extend the peak? Is that the goal, and seeing how long you can do that for?
Yeah, the idea is get the breakthrough kind of like long for half an hour.
That's quite interesting, because I feel that time itself changes anyway completely. Like when you're especially breaking through, but on psychedelics, there's like this stretching of time where it's like feels incredibly long yet incredibly short.
Yeah.
Do you think that, like, how do you ethically find out what is the safe, or what's the limit that you can work with?
Yeah, so the ethical way is that you start slow and you build up. So that's the way that we're doing it. We're starting with low doses.
Yeah.
And based on what we see in terms of the response, we build it up. The other important thing to take into account is that DMT is very short. So yeah, but by being once you turn off the tap, if you will, people will be back soon.
Okay.
So it's kind of like a clean compound for that purpose.
Are there any risks associated? Like, I mean, is there any research into the toxicity of DMT?
Yeah, there it has been. Is super safe physiologically. There is, it's not like, there's a level in which it is toxic, like all compounds or most compounds.
Yeah, like the LD50 is.
Yeah, it's super high. But anyway, it's still, what we're doing is way outside the realm of like toxicity in any case. Yeah.
And what about the psychological risk, and how do you evaluate that before when you're looking at people?
So yeah, the thing is that we're asking people during the experience how they're doing, essentially. And also that is another criteria for us to stop the infusion if needed.
Do you have to evaluate people beforehand? Like, are there psychologists? Well, I know you're a psychologist, but is there someone who is specifically there to make sure that people are, I guess, safe to do it?
Yeah, we have a screening procedure in which there's I do an initial screening, and then people go through a psychiatric screening procedure. And the main sort of criteria for that is well, people are healthy, they don't have any, conditions of depression or anxiety, and also don't have family members who have had schizophrenia or psychotic disorder. That's the basic, that's the common practice in all studies at the moment.
Yeah. Is there any link like with psychedelics and actually triggering mental health? Because a lot of the things that you hear, I know growing up, is you hear these stories of people who they claim have had recurring flashbacks for 20 years, but then what I've read is that that's actually not necessarily possible to have actual flashbacks. Do we know like how damaging or potentially damaging it could be?
Well, in terms of, so there are separate things. One is like the risk of psychotic disorders, schizophrenia, like what you hear about acid casualties. The thing is that we have very little data on that. You do hear cases about people actually having these sort of things, but it's so rare these days, especially. So that's one part of it, and I think the common practice of avoiding, family members with schizophrenia and looking at the mental health history of a participant without any of these episodes, appears to be quite a good one to certain regards. And then there's the thing of flashbacks. I think it's called hallucinogen persisting perceptual disorder. Which some people do report. Research has shown that it is a very few amount of people who get this. And all of the research that has been done showing this always show our comorbidity. So that means that people also have something else, some sort of anxiety disorder associated to that. And it also has not been reported in modern contemporary research. So it seems like with proper amount of screening, if you really screen your participants well, with some of the practices we currently have, you avoid these two issues. What is not sufficiently, I think, studied, which can be maybe a bit problematic, is the possibility of having sort of like traumatic experiences that are not well handled. And here's where the importance of having adequate practice and having adequate sitters and where it becomes particularly relevant, I would say.
Wow, it's such an interesting and crazy time that this is at the forefront of science, and this is happening now. It's just unbelievable, really. One of the things I want to talk about, but I'm not really sure like if this is something that you cover really or have looked into, is the recurring emergence of the other people in DMT, that seeing these entities. How have you what have you observed, and what is your opinion kind of on this?
It happens. We've picked it up in our research. People do have these sort of entity encounters. The question is like, are they real, right? For many people,
that's what I'm coming to get.
What's that mean? So I would say that I'm very agnostic in this regard. I think that if you ask indigenous people, they have their own systems of beliefs around entities and spirits, and ayahuasca enabling them to access the spirit realm, and it also happens with other sort of plant medicines and compounds, right? I think that the question of whether or not they're real tends to err more on the philosophical side of things, and it also tends to err. I mean, there's certainly, science can definitely tell you that they're not real in the sense that, you know, you and me are real for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you know, like there doesn't seem to be like sufficient evidence that all the elements that constitutes a stable object in reality, you know,
Yes.
they're not the same for these sort of entities or beings in that regard. But I think that the question of what is real have many sort of like depths and layers of complexities, and it's culturally bound in many ways.
How so? Would you, do you mean because of religious beliefs or cultural beliefs? I'm not sure if it's, yeah, I guess religious, of what is, so like something that we might consider a part of our own consciousness for something could be in one society or one culture be considered, you know, an angel or something like that.
Exactly. Or let's say, you know, the idea of what's real, like the relevance of dreams and how they, you know, influence
Yeah.
reality, and you know, how that is in our culture and how is that in different cultures. And, you know, like in our culture, we've relegated that completely to the realm of imagination. But then again, what is
Yeah.
imagination, and the way that imagination influences reality? And there's so many open questions in this regard. So yeah, it's a complicated topic, and I think it's, you know, there's brands of philosophy who have talked about these things for thousands and thousands of years, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like metaphysics and stuff like
Yeah.
that, and it's not easy to solve in this regard. I would say that, you know, from a scientific point of view, we can look at the brain sort of like, one, we could look at the actual phenomenology, and from the phenomenology, the experience side of things. My current thinking, after interviewing a lot of people, my feeling is that what happens in other sort of psychedelic experiences in which there's an attribution of reality, of presence in general, like there's a feeling of presence, like the world becomes alive, sort of way.
Yeah.
To me, my feeling is that there is a apparent continuum between that and, when it gets very extreme, an entity. You know, there is a living presence, you know, that I'm interacting with.
Yeah.
So this attribution of life and sentience and conscious to something else, you know, is also present in kind of like a scaled down sort of fashion in your common sort of LSD experience.
Yeah, that is that also, would you be referring to kind of like the oneness that you feel of, so that connection with everything?
Yeah, more than that, I would say specifically the idea that it's sentient.
Yeah.
That the world around me is sentient. Almost this panpsychist sort of perspective that some people gain with a lot of these experiences is that, you know, the world is alive, right? The world is conscious in some degree. I'd say that feeling, that subjective report, you know, it seems like it goes from a continuum from your common LSD experience, where it's broad and unspecific, to your high sort of intense DMT experience, where it's now focalized in a single entity.
Yeah. Representative of the oneness, is that essentially?
Representative of the sentience, of the otherness, the alterity of it all, you know. That is the feeling at the level of experience. And now at the level of the brain, you can look if, you know, certain brain systems that are commonly associated with, you know, the experience of beings and entities are, you know, or others, of other faces, or theory of mind, you know, the attribution that there's an object out there that has a sort of mind in the way that I have a mind. This is a thing that develops when you're like 4 or 5, where it's very much linked also with, you know, ideas of morality when you're growing up, which, you know, other things can have a mind in the same way that I have a mind.
So therefore they feel pain and fear just like you do. So that, that gives you this moral compass, because you don't want to be treated in a way. So therefore you don't treat these other conscious beings in a way.
Exactly. They have their own intentions or their soul. So you can look into these brain mechanisms, right? And you can see if something of the sort is ignited during the DMT experiences. And when we're still looking into some of those things.
Yeah. I don't know I don't really have an honest opinion myself on it, because I'd say I'm definitely agnostic on it. However, probably traditionally agnostic, leaning to a more atheist side of things. However, there's definitely it makes you question, like, as much as I feel I have a very sound belief system, and I'm open, but I could maybe be a little bit too closed. It makes me question myself to a point where if I'm doing that, if I'm questioning myself, then I'm like, wow, maybe this is more than I think. And then once I start reading into things about, the possibility of, if aliens are existing, then, the more that maybe the likelihood is that these are other dimensional beings, that, the only way we could contact with aliens would be through, we're getting into all of the aspects of, wormholes and bending time in different dimensions, and so then I think in the back of my mind I have that start playing, and then I'm like, oh, maybe it's this. Maybe there are these other things that are kind of trying to connect with me, but then I sit down and think about it, and I think it's probably just a reflection of myself in the end.
Well, I think that's the the bit like what happens sometimes with psychedelic users. I feel a bit when they have it too strong is that they can adopt a bit of like a naive,
yes,
realistic approach to things.
Okay.
So it's like, oh, this thing is real in the same way that all the other things are real.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot.
And my feeling is that you can definitely hold an agnostic position in which, those things can be real in a different sort of way, but nonetheless very real, and meaningful and impactful,
Yeah.
And hold that in some sort of like, in a gentle touch sort of way, which is, I think, an important aspect of how do we grasp into things with these psychedelic experiences, especially the strong ones that shift these sort of like perspectives of reality. And because the jumping to conclusions, it's is an easy thing to do. There's a lot of shamans who do say and speak and talk about how these, ayahuasca can be, the biggest liar in the world in certain contexts or in certain situations.
Tricking you.
We know that psychedelics increase suggestibility. We have evidence for that. It can make you believe things or be convinced of things during the acute experience because it's so rich and meaningful. There's a lot of experience of insights during these experiences as well, like the aha moments, right? In which you have like a cognitive revolution of sorts and everything changes and you understood it and so on.
Yeah.
That does not, and so I think what's needed in that, it's a form of mediation. You need an interpersonal, and that's why people emphasize so much this idea of integration and preparation. These are intersubjective instances and devices in which people can have an opportunity to bounce off these aha moments, these insights, so that they can, ideally have a healthier way to relate to them, as opposed to this sort of like firm grasping sort of thing.
Yeah.
And here's where the comparison with Buddhist practices become quite relevant. Like, these guys have been having similar sort of insights and realizations and moments in which their metaphysical sort of realities are massively transformed. But they have a community and they have a practice and they have a sort of like a craftsmanship approach to experience, so that they can grow into that in a healthy sort of way. And that's what it's a lifetime sort of process in a way.
I think it's riskier though with psychedelics, because that suggestibility has just in itself makes it more of a risk, because the mediators in themselves can then have an influence upon the people that they are mediating.
Exactly. And I think,
I've definitely experienced some of that, or witnessed that happening, and how do you, it's almost like having somebody who is completely removed of opinion or unbiased guiding, but then that's almost impossible.
Yeah, Yeah, no, it's I think the idea of you need good guides. I mean, I think that that's a thing, and I think we need, definitely there are better instances and better circles than others. I think the community has mechanisms of self-regulation in that regard, like purging out the bad shamans, and it's not perfect.
Yeah.
But it is to certain we need a kind of like a trip advisor sort of mechanism maybe in the future around this, but like a literal trip advisor. But
yeah, that is rate my trip, brilliant.
yeah. I'd say that I think there's an important element of fostering. I think one, like self-regulation mechanisms are in place. People, if you compare it to, like, for example, acid casualties in the 60s and how people were dosing in the 60s and 70s compared to how they're dosing now, how much people are aware of setting versus how they were now. Like, there are self-regulation mechanisms going on. People do get better at these things. And the same can be said about like these influences. But I think, like, I agree, it's not necessarily enough. And this is where it becomes relevant to have these spaces, these instances of like, having the ability of people to grow into these experiences in a safe sort of way.
I think having them, having like therapeutic uses of psychedelics legalized is the next major step, in my opinion, to create that. Because if you've got like regulatory framework essentially backed by the government, or then that kind of removes it reduces the risk of having these kind of shady, nefarious characters with bad intent. But I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. But yeah, like, do you guys do you have any influence or connection with law policy making and kind of influencing of that in your research, or is it just completely a no-go?
One of the,
obviously I know about Professor Nutt's past.
Yeah, so David Nutt definitely has an interest and an influence on that regard. Let me just turn this light. But from our side, we tend to focus more on the generating evidence, which could also influence policy to a certain extent, I would say. Like a bit doing the work in a way, that work. Things that might be relevant for policy and research. One of the things that I've been studying, for example, is how your worldviews can change with psychedelics as a research. I think that has sort of ethical implications and has implications around how do you mediate these events? How do you have these sort of things? And I think that there is a role for legalization of having a sanctioned sort of thing, and having instances that would favor mechanisms of self-regulation. So you have ethical instances around common psychotherapy, for example, around how people can transpass boundaries between the clients and the therapists, for example. When you have a guild, that's kind of like a self-regulation mechanism in which, they watch out for these sort of trespassing sort of instances and so on. So I think that to some degree, the fact that it's not just the underground anymore does help in that regard.
Yes,
that's an important part of it. I don't know if it's the only one, because then you get into complicated things like, let's say in a country in which you have indigenous use, it's decriminalized, not legalized, and then who decides the best practice, what's right and wrong, whether or not that indigenous practice is completely off or not. So I think having a way in which you have multiple mechanisms of regulation would be optimal, I would say, as opposed to a single one.
What is that status though? So I guess like in Chile, for example, or Peru, what is the status? How does it work with the indigenous cultures? currently?
So in Chile it's illegal,
Mm-hmm.
but in Peru is to criminalize the use of ayahuasca. I don't know if it's legal per se. I'm not aware, but I know that definitely decriminalized to a certain extent.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Cool. We've gone over an hour already.
Cool. That's not good.
Time flies.
Yeah.
We've lost the concept of time and it's warping, and next thing you know, it's maybe it feels like it's been a 2-minute DMT trip, but it's been an hour. I've absolutely, this has been super interesting. So I just want to say like a thanks so much. I've actually, there's so much more I want to pick your brain on and find out about, you know, what you know and what you're doing. Do you have plans to like write a book or anything that's more kind of accessible for those who aren't reading scientific papers?
Yeah, well, at the time, no. There's still a lot of work to be done before I can, you know, put it all down and like, but you know, who knows in the future, I'd be interested in that. But what I am is that I'm starting to, you know, generate this foundation for the scientific study of consciousness. It's a Chilean one, you know, but an element of it is about accessible information and making things easier to access. In that regard,
How are you
that's for
running
the time
this?
being.
Sorry, this foundation that you set up.
As online, I'm doing it with a group of psychiatrists in Chile and scientists. It's just about a way to generate the discussion in South America.
Cool.
You know, taking this as an opportunity to deepen, you know, our exploration of consciousness. Essentially. Yeah.
Great. Wow.
Cool.
Thank you so much. A big shout out as well to Carl, you know, for connecting us. I'm really glad he put us in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. It was very nice, you know, very nice opportunity to chat.
Well, I hope your shower is all sorted, and there's no water on the boat.
Yeah, this is the next on my list. We'll see. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I'll just I'll remove you and finish up now. Keep in touch. I'd love to have some updates. Send me over any links, and I'll put links to your work on the description. And in general, it's really interesting. So.
All right. No, thank you, man. Thank you. All right. Yeah.
Cool.
See you.
Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Shifty Perspective. We were live with Chris Timmerman. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Carl for connecting me and Chris and for being a great guest previously on the episode. Hopefully, we will have more exciting. It just seems to be getting better and better. So I'm looking forward to continuing this journey and looking forward to you all continuing this with me. So if you have any comments, suggestions, please feel free to send them to me via social media. And if you want to get on the show, then also drop us a message. I just want to hear your story. I want to speak to everybody and find out everybody's perspective, because we really do have different perspectives, and the only way that we can connect and become better people is by learning from other people's perspectives. So thank you. Stay